big question I've got at breaks, and when I've been able to meet people, is that it always seems that the California is a little bit ahead of Europe in terms of movements. And Kelly actually is one of the people who've traveled maybe the farthest. She comes from the San Francisco Bay Area, where LinkedIn is headquartered. They also have offices here. But for me, LinkedIn is one of the really premier companies that's focused on the inner dimension of work and how to support connectiveness, compassion, and really providing a workplace that inspires people and energizes people. So I'm glad, really appreciate you coming here. I know you had other travels in Europe, but it's still a long trip to make.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled to be here today, and Soren and I have done some work in the Bay Area together too, and when he offered me the opportunity to come and speak here in Dublin, I jumped at it. It's great to be here.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So if you do have questions, there will be a time for that, and I thought we would just start off. I know in the announcement there was a little bit about your background,
sure.
But I was curious to just start off with how this whole area of learning development became of interest to you, and a little bit of your story around
Yeah, great question. So, so interestingly enough, I mean, I was an English major in undergrad, and I thought that I wanted to teach at the university level when I was going to school. But I ended up in high tech, kind of not just through opportunity, and I've been in high tech now for 30 years. And it's interesting because when I first started out, I was doing kind of things around learning, more around online help systems and things like that. But I quickly got into management, and I was at Sun Microsystems for over 20 years, where I worked in product development and worked my way up through the ranks there to some pretty senior levels. And then what was interesting there is kept getting opportunities to do new and different things, which I thought was great. I ended up going into corporate strategy and planning and was doing acquisition integration for about 4 years. But I came to a point in my career where I was thinking, okay, I'm having a lot of success and I'm doing a lot of different things, but for some reason, it didn't feel like I was fulfilled, internally, and I felt that I wanted to have more meaning in my life, and that I wasn't getting it through the work that I was. Even though I was enjoying my work, I felt like what I was doing outside of work and what I was doing inside of work were two different things. I almost quit high tech at that point. I thought, well, I think I'm going to try to go into nonprofit, and maybe that's a way that I can. Find more meaning in the world. And I thought about education, again, going back to my roots. And instead I thought, well, maybe my path to nonprofit can be through the corporate world. And I ended up, again, getting an amazing opportunity that kind of came to me at Sun to run a learning and development organization at Sun. And so I thought, okay, I'll get into that professionally with the eye on, really looking towards nonprofit for my future. And so that's how I ended up in learning, and then ended up, and an interesting thing is that when I did that for 4 years at Sun, and then Sun got acquired by another company. And Sun was a great place to work, and it provided a lot of different opportunities. But this company that was acquiring Sun, just the values of that company and what I felt like I could really contribute to making a difference in the world, I didn't feel like I could do that there. And I ended up leaving Sun and then joined Yahoo. And then after being at Yahoo for a few years, I thought I was pretty happy at Yahoo, and LinkedIn actually came and found me and presented this amazing opportunity. They connect
through LinkedIn?
Sorry, they connected to me. I mean, yes, they did. They connected to me through LinkedIn, and I just thought, wow, this is a really amazing opportunity. And at first I was intrigued by LinkedIn and the idea of starting a learning organization from the ground up. I think that was the first thing that intrigued me. And I had several conversations, including with Jeff, our CEO, about the role at LinkedIn. And it was through that several-month interviewing discussion process that I learned so much about LinkedIn, and that it's a truly unique place to be, and that it is some place where I could finally bring both what I wanted to do personally and professionally together, through the company that I was working at.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how that journey.
And so was there something in particular about Jeff's vision that resonated with you, or what was it about that invitation from LinkedIn that seemed to feel like it fit that?
Right. Well, Jeff is pretty passionate about what he does and about the company, and we talked about talent being the number one priority and how passionate he was about learning and development. And I'd never heard an executive in my whole career talk about and be passionate about learning in the way that he is. And he very much wanted to be in the interview process because he felt, and I agree completely, that whoever was going to run learning at LinkedIn had to be somebody who realized how important it could be to people's careers. That he said, I remember in one point of the conversation, he said, Kelly, what I want is people to have the feeling that when they join LinkedIn, it's just like they got accepted to the best school in the world, and that they're going to be able to transform their career while they're at LinkedIn, and we want to give them that promise. And I thought, oh my God, this is a dream, because that was my hope and vision too. And so that really resonated.
And I noticed you recently changed your title. I think we announced your old title, which was Head of Talent.
Right. So my new title, which I changed my title recently with some brainstorming with my boss, and it's Talent Transformation and Inclusion. And the reason we decided to change that, I mean, ever since I joined LinkedIn, we talked about the mission and the vision of learning was to help our employees change the trajectory of their career, transform the trajectory of their career through learning and development. And everything we do at LinkedIn through learning, it has that at its root, in terms of really helping people transform, and whether that's through learning a new skill or having a new experience. It could be through a promotion, but not always, but it's just about, I think we think about transformation so much at LinkedIn, and we talk about it on a regular basis, and it's about transforming self, company, and world. And so even though from the beginning I'd always talked about learning and development being this catalyst for transformation and the way we can help our employees transform, it wasn't in my title. My scope increased a bit recently, where I also took on talent management and inclusion for LinkedIn, and so the talent management includes coaching and mentoring and our employee voice survey and employee engagement and that. And so it seemed like a good time to rethink what this was all about. So talent transformation and inclusion was what we came up with, and I think it feels right.
Yeah,
and, I like it. So
good. Yeah, I don't see many titles with transformation in their as part of one of the words, so it's really great to see. So what are some of the things that you all are doing that you're excited about at LinkedIn? I know some of them, but I think if you wanted to highlight some of the ones that you're most excited about. I know we've talked about kind of new hires and what the orientation is for new hires, and this whole vision that they're there to transform.
Right.
And even if their goal is to leave LinkedIn in 2 years and move forward to a different company, how do you support them, whatever those transformational goals are?
Right.
So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, and just whatever you feel like is on the kind of learning edge or cutting edge of this area.
Well, I think that, at LinkedIn, we really feel like the culture and values at LinkedIn are our differentiator. It's why people love to work there, and that we try to help people understand what those are all about from actually through the recruiting process. We talk a lot about it. And it's interesting because I've been at several other companies where people talk about culture and values, and they may be slogans or signs on the wall that people see and they refer to once in a while, but then it's down to bottom line revenue kind of things, and that's what really gets talked about the most. And I think what makes LinkedIn really unique is that our executive team talks about our culture and values all the time. It's part of how the success that you can have at LinkedIn is based on how much you walk the walk on our culture and values. And we have a company all hands every 2 weeks where Jeff gets up and talks about what's going on in the company, and it always leads with talent is our number one priority, and we talk about everything in regards to our culture and values. So getting back to some of the things that we do in learning and development, is, from the recruiting process, we talk about that. And we also talk about, culture fit when we interview people. So, for example, some of our values are around relationships really matter. We're a really collaborative organization, and we believe in transformation. And when we interview people, if it feels like people are there just because they are just looking for a job and they aren't passionate about LinkedIn, that's kind of a red flag to us. And also if they feel very competitive rather than collaborative, if that's the kind of energy they have, we start from there and say that might not be a good culture fit here. And we've actually over time, I wouldn't say experimented with it, but we've made hires that the company just, it doesn't work, and the culture kind of automatically rejects that, which is a good thing. And the reason that happens is because starting from day one, we do our onboarding, where we talk a lot about our culture and values and what's important to LinkedIn and how we operate. And I think why that's important, especially on day one, to reinforce that, is if you don't do that, you've got a lot of people coming. We're in super hyper growth mode, right? When I started, I think we were 2,000 employees, and we're ending up this year over 7,000 employees. And so if you don't do that, if you don't introduce that and really have an emphasis on that, people will just bring whatever culture that they had with them and hope to, because they don't know. So we really reinforce that starting from our onboarding program, and then when we do our management development program, it's not just about teaching people how to manage, it's how do you manage at LinkedIn. So when you have one-on-ones, how do you have open, honest, and constructive conversations? And then back to your earlier comment around our founder, Reid Hoffman, just recently wrote a book called The Alliance. And I think it's really fascinating because it's really a paradigm shift in the employee-employer relationship. And it's something that we really believe in at LinkedIn, and Reid wants to kind of share this with the world. But the idea is that I think we know intuitively that people don't stay at one company anymore for their whole career. And but yet there's something about talking about that doesn't seem right in a company. It's like if you feel like you're not really getting what you need out of your company or your career, instead of talking to your manager about it, you kind of start interviewing in the background. And by the time you've had those conversations with the other company, you've kind of made up your mind, and then you tell your employer that you're leaving. And the Alliance is about breaking that down and saying, from day one, we hire you into LinkedIn, we want you to have an amazing experience, and we want you to give us your all. And in return, LinkedIn will help you succeed and help you try to transform your career. And so what we talk about are these things called tours of duty, which can be like 2 years. Say, okay, this is your tour of duty for the first 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, let's have the conversation. Is there another tour of duty here for you at LinkedIn? Let's talk about what that might be. I'll help you get there. And if it turns out that your next play is outside of LinkedIn, that's okay, and we're going to help you do that too. But then let's have the conversation about how to effectively transition out of it. Let's talk about how I can help you with that next move. And I think that it just puts more reality into, and I think more trust. That takes a lot of trust, I think, in an organization, and something we really value as well, that you can have those conversations without fear of it being used against you in some way.
Do you think that's why, I know that recently it's been, I think Google's up there too, but LinkedIn has been voted one of the best places to work.
Yeah.
And I think Jeff has the highest rating on Glassdoor, which is, it rates CEOs based on the employees, former employees or current employees. Yeah.
I do believe those are some of the things that help us create an environment where people really want to work at LinkedIn. I think that people feel like they can really have an impact. It was, coming in to LinkedIn and starting a learning organization from the ground up, I wasn't given any parameters. It was like, great, go and create something amazing, right? And go, have an impact. And I've been able to realize that. So if you and I've seen so many around me have that same opportunity. So yes, it's about, I think, our culture and values. It's about the impact you can have. It's about this transformation that everybody wants to have meaning and feel like they're having an impact on the world. And if you can do that through your work every day and feel happy, I think that's pretty big.
That's pretty cool.
And the other thing I think is interesting, you know, Jeff spoke at Wisdom in the Bay Area. We videoed it and shared it on our internal learning platform. And it is the highest viewed video at all of LinkedIn, Jeff's Wisdom videos.
On compassionate management.
What's that?
On compassionate.
On compassionate management. And I think that tells you that people really are, it's both a tops down and a bottoms up approach. I think that really works well too, because I've seen other companies be successful when there's more of a grassroots effort and sometimes when there's a tops-down effort, but I think having it both ways and really having your CEO and your executive team talk about this all the time and support it in such a great way is really amazing.
So I'm curious how the work with compassion gets integrated in. I mean, often people don't feel like compassion is the last place you experience work. You know, for people, like, work is like the last place that they experience compassion. So they go to a Buddhist center at night or a Christian center or Islamic center, something where they feel like, oh, that's where I develop my heart and my care for the world. And I think you guys have tried to say, no, compassion needs to be a central component to how we listen and how we manage teams and how our managers and leaders lead. Can you say a little bit about how that gets supported within a large for-profit company?
Yeah, and I think Fred Kaufman has also been a speaker at Wisdom. He actually joined LinkedIn, I think, about a year ago. Fred wrote a book called Conscious Business, and a lot of the culture and value, it's interesting because Fred was Jeff's mentor previous to him joining LinkedIn, and a lot of the culture and values that we have at LinkedIn come from Conscious Business. So Fred's joined, and we recently created a learning program around conscious business. And part of the reason that we did that is around this area of compassion. It's that especially when you're in hypergrowth mode and when you're growing fast and you're moving so quickly all the time, it's easy to lose sight of compassion and how to slow down a little bit and how to have conversations with people. So what we introduced to our employees are things like how do you have those difficult conversations, and workshops around actually modeling that behavior and showing people how to because for everyone it's not intuitive. Sometimes you have to learn what that looks like, and so modeling those kinds of difficult conversations is one way we do it. We do it through our management development program, but I think even more recently, we realized that the bigger that LinkedIn becomes, the harder it is to hold on to what we've got. And so, and what happens is conflict is going to arise in a company. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's not that whether it will arise, is how you deal with it when it does. And so one of the things that we've started to talk a lot about is this notion of clean escalations, and this is again about being open, honest, and constructive in terms of, and compassionate in terms of how you deal with people. And it's instead of, I think at a typical company, what you might see is there's a conflict with somebody, and say a peer of mine are having a conflict, and I go to my boss and say, okay, so and I are having this conflict. I want you to help resolve it. And what happens at LinkedIn is we say, no, we reject that. You can't go to your boss without the other person that you're having the conflict with, and we call that a clean escalation. So I have to bring my colleague with me, and together we go to my boss and say, this is the issue that we're having, and can we talk about it and solve it together? And so I think that what that does is it creates an environment where you feel like it's not okay to go behind people's back to talk about issues, which then causes them to fester, and that you actually are modeling that open, compassionate. I mean, compassion is about really putting yourself in the other person's shoes, right? And understanding their perspective and what they're thinking. And so that kind of communication where you can all get together and all of a sudden I am kind of forced to look at my colleagues' point of view in a different way, right? Because you're having that conversation. So those are a few of the things that we're doing.
Great, great. And I'm curious, for people whose boss or whose CEO is not talking about the importance of compassionate management, which I'm sure there's anybody who has a CEO who's, but most people work on small teams and they have some influence. Do you have, just from your years of being in the learning development field, some suggestions or thoughts around how to bring in more awareness, compassion, connection within whatever small team one might work with, even if there's not larger support from upper management?
Right, yeah. I think, my experience both at Sun and Yahoo, where, I felt, for example, that Sun was a fantastic company, but it wasn't, I didn't feel like the executive team had the same, I guess, mantra around the values that I've seen at LinkedIn. But what I've seen work really well is that you can still have that in smaller work groups. I know that and one of the reasons I stayed at Sun for so long is that I think in pockets in groups and in organizations, you can create that same kind of environment if those are your values and you want to bring those to the workplace. When I think about it a lot about Jeff, why LinkedIn is the way it is and Jeff modeling that behavior, you just think of that as a macrocosm of what you can create on your own. So a microcosm of that is your own work group, and then if it's a little bit bigger, your organization. And if you find yourself working with like-minded people, or if you're if you're a group leader, you have the opportunity to introduce that, and people really will embrace that if they share the same values.
So you could have the values of that team and clarify those and stand for those, even if it's might not be supported by the larger network.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things I've enjoyed about Jeff was he comes out and he spoke very passionately about the importance of compassionate management. And I thought, dude, you're just setting yourself up because people are going to criticize you. Well, yeah, but you fired this person, and how can you do this and talk about compassionate management? And he's like, well, sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to let somebody go if it's not a fit.
That's right.
It's the process of how you let them go and the conversation around how you let them go. It's not being nice and sweet and letting people take as long a vacation as they want or show up to work whenever they feel like it. Right. But it's this way of relating that has compassion and understanding as its point, but it's not necessarily, it can be very strong at times.
Absolutely, and I think that people mistake that a lot, especially new managers who don't know when you talk about compassionate management, they feel like maybe that means that they can't be strong in what they're doing or effectively lead their team because they have to be too lenient. Right. But the example that Jeff gave around, I've seen people struggle in jobs. They're not being successful, and they feel it, and you feel it. And yet, if you equate that with, it's compassionate to keep them there because it would be not compassionate to let them go, I think that's really not the right way to look at it. I've had employees in the past where it's a big relief, to say this really isn't working. There's something better for you out there, and this isn't a good match. Let me help you find something that is a better fit for you, and that's compassion, right?
Yeah. And it goes towards the difficulty versus just trying to stay away from the difficulty.
Right, and it is. That's why we stress so much having difficult conversations, and people tend to want to shy away from conflict and those difficult conversations, but if you model and show people how they can do those effectively, and at the end it's a win-win for everyone, then I think people are more apt to do it.
Yeah. And then I don't know if the vibration might be a little strong word, but the energy of the culture shifts when there's a way of processing grievances and frustrations.
Right.
And when there isn't, it tends to build and fester, and then explode, which I think is what we see a lot of. Yeah.
But it takes work, to maintain that and practice.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So we have a few minutes for questions. It's very hard to see from the stage, just so you know. So if you want to wave your hand, it probably is going to be an easier wave. I see a waver over here. Oops. There's a place you speak to. on the...
It's right here. So, for me, one of the main takeaways is this tour of duty. Myself, I have a GE background, and I know that Jack Welch at the early days said, you know, you have a job for life at GE. He turned that around in saying, you know, we offer jobability, which I think is a very strong thing. I think there's a very thin line between joining a company now, talking about tour of duty, whereas the corporation would really want to see you have a lot of loyalty, commitment, and long-term engagement. So how do corporations have to make that paradigm shift of going towards this sort of tour of duty stuff?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think that corporations typically have a lot of times that's the thing going in. It's like, we're going to hire you and we hope you stay here for your whole career. But as I said earlier, I think that that's not very realistic for most people. And I think that if big corporations can get their head around the fact that the happier that they make their employees and the more open conversations you can have with your employees, the more likely it is that people are going to want to stay at your company because there's, right? It's, I remember it's like learning and development. At a previous company, there was a conversation where some executives were saying, we were trying to figure out whether to do a training program for certain employees, and they said, but you know, what if we spend all this money and train all these employees and then they leave? Right. And it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, well, if you don't train them, they're for sure going to leave. And what happens is if you create this environment where you're nurturing and you're really helping people to grow and really see the transformation that they can have in their careers, and have an open dialogue about the fact that they might not stay their whole career, it has the effect that they will want to stay. Yeah, so I think that that's hard sometimes for more traditional corporations to get their head around. But I think that just like any paradigm shift, you'll have some early adopters, you know, who will try it out and see the impact that it will have on talent, and the fact that they will want to have those conversations, will want to stay, and then we'll see how it goes.
I should have one right next, if I could.
Oh, sure.
What advice would you give to your younger self, like one piece of advice when you first started?
That's a great question. I think early on I didn't really sit quietly and think about what things I valued most in terms of partnering myself with a company, and I think I was fortunate in some ways, you know, that it worked out for me with Sun, for example, where it was a really great company. But I think if I were more thoughtful earlier on, I could have made more intentional decisions about my career choices based on how I wanted to align my values with where I wanted to work. And maybe it's just the energy or the universe that helped me along in my way, because it worked out pretty well. But I think being really mindful and intentional about identifying your values and what's important to you, and how you spend a lot of time at work, and you should be aligned with your values there. So I think that would be one piece of advice I would have given myself.
I think it's out of our control.
Hi there. What happened?
Can you hear me? They can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Misha. I'm an architect and economist, and I actually worked on building Google's headquarters in Paris. Kelly, thanks so much for making the long trek to be with us.
Sure.
I really appreciate what you're talking about, talent, and I think we really need to understand seeing office workers as guests and as brand ambassadors, and I really can hear that kind of coming through. And I'd be really curious to know what types of techniques you're putting in place to inspire talent through potentially creativity and play and discovery, exploration, and then also just what types of performance measures you use for transformation.
Wow, those are great questions. So, yeah, thanks for the question. And I think, in regards to the first question around play and creativity and innovation and what types of things we're doing to foster that, I think that, again, LinkedIn as a company really values that. So we have a team that drives employee experience that my organization partners really closely with, and we have this thing called In Day that is once a month, one Friday a month, and it's exactly for that reason. It's like you can take that day for anything you want. We usually have a theme, like we have a theme coming up that's inclusion, where we're going to be driving a lot of activities around the world in all of our LinkedIn office around awareness around inclusion. But that's just the theme. You can decide you want to do anything in that time. For example, if you decided, I'm really interested in mindfulness and I want to spend my in-day meditating or taking a mindfulness class or sitting and going with my team out to
nature or something.
Nature or whatever you can do. So we try to help guide people through that. But if you have your own ideas, you can use that time for that. And then, in addition, I think a couple of the things that we do are around. We do a lot of things around hackathons and incubator programs, LinkedIn for Good incubator programs. We just did this. We just hosted Taproot, which I'm on the board of, with the Taproot Challenge, and it kind of modeled our incubator program. But at LinkedIn, you can get together with any group of people that you want and say, I have this great idea that I'd love to have be part of LinkedIn. And so you get with the team, and then at the end of the quarter, there's a judging panel that says, they pick 3, I think, out of the programs, and it actually gets funded to move forward. So I think we are always trying to come up with new ideas for innovation and fostering creativity in that. So those are a couple of examples. In terms of the second question about how do we measure transformation. So we do a couple of things. One of the things that my team created on our learning platform is something called a transformation plan, and you'll see it highlighted in Reed's book on the Alliance. And the idea is that you can go in and ask yourself, it's kind of a mini assessment where you can say, here's how I want to transform myself. I don't have a clue what my next career thing is, or I know my next play, or I just want to learn a new skill. This is how I want to transform. And it takes you through a series of questions, and then at the end, you're actually dragging and dropping into a tool, learning assets and activities of things that you can do to transform yourself. So far, it's not a very robust measurement in terms of how people are transforming, but we're encouraging people to create these transformation plans, track their progress against them, and have conversations with their managers about how they're progressing in their transformation. And so far, people are really enjoying that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So we probably have time for one more. Looks like it's out of my control where that thing goes right now. I'm letting go.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi.
We've been carrying out a study into occupational well-being for the last year, and we brought some of the pioneers in the corporate space to work with us. And there were some big barriers that came to light in Ireland in the corporate occupational space. Some of those challenges were around culture, values within organisations that are real barriers to well-being. And really what the HR managers and occ health specialists were crying out for is kind of evidence-based research and real markers of showing ROI to, I suppose, get the leadership team on board. I mean, you're blessed. You've got a leader that gets this. And that's one of the biggest barriers, one of the major barriers and the cry out. So do you have any examples or case studies of how that investment has been worth it for LinkedIn?
Right. No, it's a great question. And in fact, we're doing, in terms of health and wellness and learning, we are just, I guess, more formally trying to put together that program so we can show the impact. Again, it's intuitive to us that the more you invest in your employees in being more well-rounded and balanced and thinking about mind, body, spirit, wellness, everything together will create ultimately great things for a company's bottom line. I've actually been doing some research, and we've been working with Wisdom Labs a little bit and putting together a curriculum where we can actually show the impact, because there have been other companies that have done studies on how programs like the wellness programs that they've put in place that include mindfulness and meditation and health and wellness, nutrition, the whole package, where it actually can have a huge impact on the bottom line. We're just embarking on putting that together and actually trying to measure that so that we can show, because even though we have, it's interesting because people get a little bit of the wrong impression of Jeff in terms of, yes, he's really into compassionate management, but when we put together our learning programs, he wants to see the measurement and the impact and the transformation plans and how many people are doing and finishing them. And so when we put together a program like this, he will want to know, that what impact is this having on LinkedIn? That's important too. He is a CEO, so he does also care about those things. So I would love to come, after we've done a little more work on that, love to come back and share our results. So.
Thank you. So we have a time. We're going to have some very short announcements, and we're going to have lunch. But before that, I want to thank Kelly for joining us and just sharing your